Israeli aircraft and tanks have stepped up strikes in southern Gaza over the New Year's weekend. But the big announcement was that Israel is now planning to pull back some of its troops. This is a move being welcomed by everyone, particularly Israel's closest ally, the United States. This is a signal to a gradual shift to lowering the intensity of the operations, particularly in the northern part of the battered Gaza Strip. However, Israel also says that the war in Gaza, which has reduced much of its territory down to rubble, killing thousands and plunging more than 2 million people into a humanitarian disaster, has many more months to go before the military operation can conclude. But Israel has signaled a new phase in its offensive. A senior government official has said that the military would be drawing down some of the forces from inside Gaza later this month. Instead, the focus will shift to a much more long-term phase, which is going to be more localized. The Israeli general who spoke to Reuters described it as a mopping up operation. The Israeli official also said that the troop reduction would allow some of their reservists to return back to civilian life, and that would shore up Israel's war-battered economy. But there could be a bigger motive in here. It could potentially free up some of the Israeli army units in case there is going to be a wider conflict. And the big fear is this conflict could spread to the north with Lebanon's Hezbollah, which is an armed group that is backed by Iran. A US official, in fact, said that the decision taken by Israel appeared to indicate the start of a shift to a more lower intensity operation in the north of the Gaza Strip. Remember, that's where Israel began its operations from in the aftermath of the October 7 terror attacks. The entire 250 square kilometer enclave, the bulk of the war has concentrated on the northern part. Israel had in fact issued an ultimatum to the civilians who were living there in the north, including in Gaza City, to flee towards the south, to leave towards the south, and thereafter it started its ground operations. Washington, too, has been urging Israel to reduce the intensity of its military operation. Internationally, there have been multiple calls for a ceasefire, even as the death toll has climbed upwards of 20,000. But residents in Gaza say that Israeli planes and tanks stepped up the bombardment, particularly in the eastern and northern areas of Khan Yunis, which is in southern Gaza. It's the second biggest city in the enclave. Now, the hints of a lower tempo in northern Gaza came even as the US Navy announced that the USS Gerald Ford, which is one of the largest aircraft carriers in the world, will be returning to its home port in Virginia after being deployed to the eastern Mediterranean following the outbreak of hostilities. Remember, all of this started on the 7th of October with that Hamas attack in which over 1,000 Israelis were killed. Coincidentally, just as the United States made this announcement about the Gerald Ford, the aircraft carrier, Iran also announced that its warship Al-Borz will be entering the Red Sea. This was according to the semi-official news agency Tasnim. This comes at a time of soaring tensions on a critical shipping route on the Red Sea coast. Remember, there have been multiple attacks by Houthi rebels in Yemen who support Hamas. The United States Navy has in fact led a multi-nation effort to try and quell the kind of firefights that we've seen in this critical Red Sea transportation corridor. Artillery fire has also been reported between Hezbollah and Israel in the northern border since the start of the Gaza conflict. In fact, Israel's military has been carrying out multiple air as well as ground attacks over the last almost 3 months along the northern border. The Israeli official who spoke to Reuters also said that the situation on the border with Lebanon will not be allowed to continue as it is. This upcoming 6-month period between January and June is going to be a critical moment in how this war pans out. Now, any new escalation by Israel carries a greater risk that this could blow up into a full-blown, wider regional war. US forces are already being attacked by Iran-backed militant groups in Syria, in Iraq, and of course in Lebanon as well. The Gaza war was triggered by a surprise attack by Hamas on Israeli border towns on the 7th of October, in which Israel claims more than 1,000 of its citizens were killed. Palestinian health authorities in Gaza say, in return, Israel's offensive over the last almost 3 months has killed more than 20,000 Palestinians. Residents of Sheikh Radwan, which is in Gaza City in the northern part of the Strip, they say that tanks had withdrawn after what they described as the most intense 10 days of warfare that they've seen since this conflict began. Tanks also pulled out of Gaza City's Al-Mina district and parts of Tel Al-Hawa district while retaining some positions in the suburbs. And that is critical because the suburbs control the main coastal road that runs north to south across the Gaza Strip. On Monday, Hamas's armed wing also claimed to have killed 15 Israeli soldiers after triggering an explosive minefield east of the Tufa neighborhood in Gaza City. Tanks remained in other parts of northern Gaza, and fighting was reported in the central parts of the enclave unabated. Multiple eyewitnesses also cited shelling by tanks in parts of the Al-Bureji refugee camp in central Gaza, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in the Strip. Hamas also showed its continued ability to target Israel after more than 12 weeks of this war, launching a barrage of rocket fire at the capital, Tel Aviv. Hamas seized more than 240 hostages on the 7th of October. Israel believes at least half of them are still being held in Gaza. Some of them were released during a brief ceasefire. Some others were mistakenly killed in airstrikes or in rescue or escape attempts. Qatar and Egypt are seeking to negotiate a new ceasefire as well as a new hostage swap deal. Without Hamas's terrorist infrastructure being destroyed and its governance capabilities completely being toppled, this war will not end. That has been the position stated by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He reiterated that on Saturday in an address to the Israeli people and said that the country must retake control of Gaza's borders with Egypt. Now, this is an area that is so crammed with civilians who have fled this carnage across the rest of the enclave. It's going to be almost unimaginable that Israel will be able to completely get rid of the 2 million plus Palestinian population, or for that matter, that Egypt will welcome all of them with open arms. Retaking that Rafah crossing, the southern border, could also constitute a de facto reversal of Israel's position that it was taken last in 2005. Remember, in 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza after another operation, a military operation there. And at that time, it was said that the only realistic solution was a two-state solution. But now, with Netanyahu's weekend address saying that they need to reclaim the Rafah crossing, need to reclaim the southern border from Egypt, that does raise new questions over the future of this conflict itself and the future prospects of a two-state solution. Washington, meanwhile, maintains that Israel should allow a Palestinian government to control Gaza as and when this conflict is over. But Israel, and particularly the Netanyahu government, believes that now is perhaps the time, in the middle of this conflict, to once and for all bury the two-state solution. What they're looking at is a one state, and that one state happens to be the Jewish state of Israel.